Well, hi again everybody. Welcome to my latest video. You may be a little bit surprised seeing another video about Active Directory related to my new server, but I got an awful lot of questions, unfortunately most of them through email, related to the last couple of videos that I did. In particular, people just wanted to know, because some of them have not heard about it, what is Active Directory and how can it help them? Now, I did explain that a little bit, but definitely not to the detail I should have. So in this video, I'm going to try to explain it a little bit more without getting too deep in the weeds, if you know what I mean. So hopefully I'll give the bigger picture to it, and we'll find out, whether or not this is something that can help you, because it is definitely helping me at this point, and I want to share that with the world. On the screen here, you will see me going through some of the benefits, the disadvantages, and some of the things that aren't affected by it. That's how I'm going to start off. So let's talk about the cost of having Active Directory, and there are some costs involved with this, and I wanted to go through some of them. The first one is you must have at least one Active Directory server in your network. It is highly recommended to have a backup that I'll explain later. For now, that's all I have is one, but my plans are to change in that regard sometime in the future. Mainly because I have access to my server directly. It's only a few feet away from me at any one time. Usually when the server is quite far away from people, maybe in a different building even, for larger organizations, then you definitely want to have at least one backup, maybe a lot more than that. Also, you must have Windows Professional or a version of Windows Professional depending on which flavor of Windows you have. Currently, everybody should be using Windows 10, but I know some are still using Windows 7, and hopefully, although it's possible, if some people are using Windows XP, because certain versions of that are supported if you pay for it. I doubt that's the case for the general public, but you never know. In any case, it has to be the Windows Professional, which has been available in Windows going back since before Windows XP, when they had Windows NT even. There was a differentiation between those two. So you got to have that, which costs more money. On average 20 to 40% more, depending on where you buy it. Then you have to have a minimum security level when you install Active Directory. Some of that I showed in a previous video. There is really no way to disable it because I tried, I looked for that, and there really isn't. So you've got to accept the fact that you're going to have reasonably strong passwords. You're going to have certain types of programs that you're going to have to work a little extra hard to run them, because they're considered security risk. And so have what my SigmaNAS server mimics, which is Windows Server 2008 R2 to be specific. They want to have a minimum level of security overall so that people just don't completely crash and burn by using it. Then if you have shares, and these shares are under the control, and we'll talk about that more later, of Active Directory, if the Active Directory server goes down or makes itself unavailable for any reason, those shares are likely not going to be available to you anymore. It tends to lock out by default, so that's the most touchy area of what this Windows Active Directory and Windows servers provide. It'll probably be locked out on you, so just be aware of that and be ready to deal with it if it does happen. That's why having a backup is important as well. And there's going to be an initial increase in the complexity of your network and of the user workstations themselves. As you saw in previous videos, when you just have to try to change things to connect up to an Active Directory server. There's several steps you have to do, and there's no simple one button to do that. Then there's possible extra logon steps. Now this is mainly depending on what level of security have you chosen. I mean, do you accept passwords for, hopefully, definitely for administrators, but do you enforce or force people with regular user accounts to have passwords? Although you should, a lot of people do not do that. They don't want to be bothered with it. So if you have that case, now you're going to have to enable passwords, and strong passwords at that. And then you're going to have an increase in skill set as a result of this. Now I think that that's good. It's always good to learn. These videos that I've put up on this topic are for that purpose. And there are many, many other videos out there to learn more details about Active Directory that you can actually learn from as well. So I think it's good, but it will take some extra effort to do so. Now for some of the benefits. Those were the negatives. Let me talk about some of the positives here. The biggest one by far, and the main reason I wanted to go to it on my network, is it allows you to have all of your passwords securely managed centrally. I don't have to have my passwords established on every single Windows or other station that I have out there that could be controlled by an Active Directory. And that's a big, big plus, because not only does it allow you central location, but it also allows you to have encrypted passwords when they pass over the network. When you set up a NAS server, by default, the passwords have to go from your Windows workstation over the network to the NAS server in clear text. Now what that means is, if somebody happened to have installed a device called a sniffer that captures the packets are the chunks of data that goes across a network, they're called packets, and they're able to pick those up, they can actually see your passwords in clear text. Not a good thing. So if they broke into some peripheral device of yours and they were able to install a sniffer on that, really a virus, then all of your password security is basically gone at that point. Now there is also the availability of very strong control of the passwords beyond just the strength of the password, but also forcing expirations, complexity even more so than defaults, and other things related to logging that are very advanced. And I'm not going to go into much of that in this video, but they're all available to you once you have a Windows server running Active Directory up in your network. And as I mentioned already, the convenience of not having to have logon passwords in every client, the convenience alone, let alone the security, is a very, very worthwhile plus. Then there's something that's probably the most powerful thing, and I'll discuss it more in a little bit, called group policy controls. They're extremely powerful, and once you get used to them, they're hard to do without, believe it or not. You have a little bit of a learning curve on it, granted, but once you have that learning curve, it's like anything else. Once you know it, you know it. That's true about a lot of things, but it's definitely true here as well. And here's another big plus. You can set up what they call roaming profiles, which means once you set up your profile on one PC, then if you go and log on to another PC and authenticate it through Active Directory, and you have this function properly enabled, a little bit tricky at first, then all of the profile information will be carried over to that other PC. Very convenient. If you put things on a desktop that are common that you like to get to, then you'll have that available on every PC you log on, as long as you go through the Active Directory server. And the same is true for printers and other similar network devices, even scanners and other devices. You can manage them directly from a central location and have them available to every user, and in the way you want. So for example, if there's a printer that you don't want people to print on color normally, well, you can disable that on most printers if it's a network printer, and there is controls that are available to do that. And then, as I already said, the skills by themselves that you'll learn by doing this are extremely valuable. You can attend many, many classes, but the way you really learn anything is by living it, by having to use it, putting yourself right there in the heat of battle, as they say. It's the best way to do it. Then there are other considerations of Active Directory, things that are not affected one way or the other, so you don't have to worry about these as much. Well, to the most part. You can use any directly connected USB type device, even a backup drive if you'd like. You don't have to have that under the control of Active Directory. It generally is not affected unless that particular service that controls it was locked down by you through the policy of Active Directory. So generally it's if you got overly protective on what the user can do in terms of devices like that, then it might be a problem for them, and you may have to reverse it for either all users or a group of users. Hence the term group policies. You can set up groups of users that have different capabilities. Then if you have a NAS, another network accessible storage, which you already have like I do, and I'm going to set this up as well, then you can map those shares on those NAS devices really without being affected by it. As of course you still have the limitation of having to put the password for those accounts that you're using on the NAS itself. There's no way around that. Most NAS are not capable. You won't be able to have it authenticate to an Active Directory server. you'll have to replicate those passwords. And then if you have backups set up in any way, whether it's on a system itself, again through maybe a USB connected hard drive or through some other network backup device, it doesn't have to be affected unless you've locked down those services on everybody's PC. Now let me talk a little bit about the overall structure. I'm going to do this at a very high level just to give you the big picture, as they say. So please don't get the wrong idea that I'm teaching you Active Directory here or preparing you for a Microsoft certification exam. I am not doing that. I just like to give people the big picture. For example, you've heard the expression, don't miss the forest for the trees. Sort of along those lines. Sometimes you got to step back and look at the big picture to understand exactly how it all fits together. So I'm going to try to give you a little taste of that. First of all, we have what we call a domain. I've already mentioned that in the previous videos. It is generally one area. For example, my local area network in my home is a domain. And I have in there a lot of things. I have a bunch of users. So the user accounts are controlled by the Active Directory. I have computers. So I can enable which computers those users can get to or get onto. And I have devices, printers, scanners, and other things that I may want to share using Active Directory. I haven't set that up yet, but I will. And finally, we have applications, the actual software that you can actually control. It's so fine-grained on Active Directory, if you choose to use it, that you can actually lock down certain programs. And the whole idea here is, it's generally user-focused, and you set up by group or by your entire domain which users can get to which resources, whether they be computers, devices, peripheral devices, or programs. I didn't talk about this before, but you can set up a domain into what's called organizational units. Now, if it's a medium-sized or even a small company, or a large company, it doesn't really matter what the size is, if they have departments, let's say the accounting department and the programming department and the administrative department and human resources, whatever, then each one of those can be a separate organizational unit within the domain. And that's very critical because then you could set up what the trust areas are and what actual devices they can get to. So for example, we have, here is an example, 3 organizational units in a domain, a sample domain. In the same company though, possibly in the same building, they have a bunch of domain resources. Resources are some of the ones we already talked about. Computers, programs, peripherals, definitely file shares. That's what I meant by doing this thing. That's file shares from a disk that's sitting on probably one of these computers, but it doesn't have to be. And you can then attach all of these together so that they share those resources. So for example, if you look at it here, they are all tied together with a thing called group policies. One of the most powerful things, as I said earlier, within Active Directory. Now let me give you a little bit of a demo on exactly how this all fits together on my existing domain. Okay, let me give you a quick overview of what I want to demonstrate in this video, which is the Active Directory policies, group policies to be specific. So what I have here is a virtual Windows image running, but it's connected to my real server, the server I now have up and running. So I'm not going to show certain parts of it just for security purposes, but I can show you the parts specific to the policies. As you recall, we had these tools that are available to us. The one that I have here in this window here is the Active Directory users and computers. For what I want to show you now, I've also got to show you the Group Policy Management tool. It's a separate tool that you have to run. So here's an example of the Group Policy Management tool. I did set up a policy, and the policies I will go over in a little while, but the policy that I want to go over right now is what you could do, things that I have not activated yet. I have a domain which represents this one pefordoers.com server that I have up and running, represents my local domain. If you right click here on the actual domain designation, PE for Doers in my case, one of the choices you have is to create a new organizational unit. I've already got one, but I can make another one. I could go ahead and make something called test, and I'll use OU for organizational unit. It's very common terminology people like to use for that. I now have a new test organizational unit. Now, I have already set up something called default drives, but I can also set up other policies that I want to do. For example, if I want to set up a new set of policies, I can actually right-click on the policy objects and set up a new policy group object. So I can call this one test policy group. So now I have one called test policy group. Now right now I didn't set any policies in it, but I could do that. If I right-click on it and I say edit, this is where you see all the power of it come to life, because these are all of the different types of things at the computer level or at the user level, the various policies that you can set up. So for example, under preferences, if I expand that, I have something called Windows settings. So this will be Windows setting for the actual computers that are being shared from this domain. And in here I can actually pick where I want it. Do I want an environment? Do I want it folders? Do I want the registry change? Do I want network shares to actually be controlled by it? Or do I want to control the control panel? And there's a lot of things I can control under the control panel. There are thousands, literally thousands of different policies you can set up. One of the more common ones is down here under user configuration and then policies. And if you come in here, they have something called, let me expand this out a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about, administrative templates policy. So what I'm doing is I'm changing that one policy that I currently have is available to any of the organizational units. So if I come in here and I said for this, what do I want to do? They're all categorized by different groups of policies, but let's look at them all so you get the big picture of this. So if I click on this, these are all of the things you can do with that particular function, which is under user configuration policies and their administration of those policies. I mean, you got all sorts of stuff here. You can enable stuff, you can disable stuff. Disable tends to be the ones that most people use. For example, you can disable everything that the person has access to if you wanted to. Right now it's not configured, but you could do that. I could add or delete items that they have access to. Some of the things that might be more common: prohibit access to the new connection wizard. So you don't want them to connect to anything. And in this box here, they go through and give you a detailed explanation of what that is. I can have it so that they cannot look at event log. I can deal with how they deal with event log. But let me pick one that's prohibit. Do we want them to be able to log off? So what we'll do here is, let's see, if we click on this and we double click on it, now we can do things to it. Right now it's not configured. We can enable it. So right now, if we want them to have the ability to log off through the start menu, we can enable it, or we could disable it. If we disabled it, it tells you what's going to take place here. So let's say I wanted to disable that. So I'll click on disable and I say apply to that. And I can go through, I mean, again, there's so many just in this one function alone under, administrative templates. I can do all sorts of things to it. I can set up security settings on the Windows itself for that user. Do I want to restrict software that they have access to? I can do that. I'd have to define them. I don't have policies defined for doing that, but I could define them if I'd wanted to. But the power is enormous on this. So anyway, I now have, I did change one of the settings under administrative templates. I disabled add log off to start menu. You click on the title, it sorts it. So it shows it disabled first because alphabetical order. So we do have policy there. But once you've created that, it is now created. So that item that I've created, called test policy group, well, right now that's not being used by any organizational unit. It's not listed under R, and there's nothing listed under test. But I can make this policy now apply to that organizational unit or both organizational units. Now, just to be clear here, if that's all I wanted to do was disable log off, I should change it so that it has that sort of name. So disable log off policy. And obviously it wouldn't make sense if I did a lot of things on that one, but you could make as many group policies as you want, and you can assign as many of them to a particular organizational unit as you want. Now right now, as I said, these are available, but there's nothing assigned to test OU. If I right click on it and I say link an existing GPO, now it shows me what I can enlist, and one of them is disable log off policy. So now we'll be linking this to that. And if I say okay to that, now we have a policy that's assigned to this test organizational unit. In a future video, if you guys are interested, I could show you how to take the next step on this, because now we have to actually have test organizational unit with users. An organizational unit only has meaning if you put users in it. So for example, in RD users, I have my regular user, which I'm not going to show, but RD users, I created some users. And I have in here test again, test user, and test Rivera. Those are 3 separate users that I could log on to. And I have a policy that I've assigned to them that I'll show in a few minutes. Anyway, that's a taste of how policies work. Well, hopefully that was interesting, and it gave you a bigger picture of how I'm setting things up and how you can set it up using a real server. That was connected to my live server, as I said. But let's look at my network. I had my giant switch that connected everything together. It basically represented my local area network. And connected to that was a router that connected me to my ISP. The router also functioning as my firewall. Then I had my main workstation, which is the one I'm sitting at right now as I videotape this. And it's also where I do all my editing and where I do basically my everyday computer. I had NAS servers. I have not just one, I had 3 of them. And as I said in a previous video about doing my backups, I had a special setup for that. But that was the main source of all of my file shares, and then connected to that wasn't just my main engineering workstation, but then I recently built a backup engineering workstation, which visitors use if they need a high-powered computer as well. And then I had other computers spread around the house, a combination of desktop computers, laptop computers, and even all-in-one computers. Spread all over the place, all of them running Windows 10 now. I've shown some of the upgrades to those in previous videos. Oh, I forgot, I also have a test bench that when I'm using it, it was connected to this network as well. Well, imagine now how I had to deal with passwords. A nightmare. I had to have the same password for my account on every computer, and my David under admin account, which is my main administrative account, on every computer, and on the NAS devices, and all users of this network, whichever computers they planned on logging into. Some people didn't log into certain computers, and others, tended to stay to a restricted one, but most people wanted the ability to be flexible. If they're sitting in a bedroom, they might want to go, and log on to their desktop. If they were sitting in my dining room, I have an all-in-one computer sitting on the side, sort of out of the way, but usable. And I had to set it up so they had login accounts for all of that, and all of those accounts had to be matched in NAS 1. I didn't have to have them in NAS 2 and NAS 3 because the only one who ever logged onto that was me and the administrative account. So that was a limited number, but still, it was a nightmare. You try to change a password, a lot of times people didn't want to change their password because of this. The new network, those NAS devices come out. This is the one I showed in my video called PE for Doers. And we take out those NAS devices. Well, they're going to get a different role. They're not completely gone. And we put in my new Active Directory server based upon Sigma NAS. And all of these computers now are sitting there, I'll use the expression fat, dumb, and happy, because we can set up accounts and it's all on the central authentication server. And if they want to change their password, they change it on any computer they want, and it gets reflected inside of the domain controller, and life can't be better. Now, I haven't set up all my permissions yet and all of my policies I want to put in, and I haven't set up all the printers yet, but that's, it's like anything else, there's a transition involved. So I'm still using the NAS servers. So I have the NAS server as a backup. I kept NAS 1 and NAS 2, and together they give me about 7 terabytes of backup storage, which is probably just about what I need to cover my approximate 14.5 terabytes of actual real usable storage in my server. So those are my backup. But very shortly, probably, within a relatively short period of time, and I'll probably make a video about it, at least part of it, if not the whole thing, I am going to institute a new backup domain controller. Now, this won't be Sigma NAS in all likelihood. I'm still thinking about it. It might, probably not. It'll probably be, though, a Linux variant, probably Ubuntu Linux. And I'll take that, and I wanted to show Linux anyway and how to use it. So this will show how I can turn Linux into a domain controller. In this case, its role will be a backup domain controller and a very, very low-cost computer using a Raspberry Pi. I already have one designated that I bought for that. And it uses very little power, and it'll sit there just backing this guy up. So in case this guy loses its Active Directory database, because that's all Active Directory really is a database that sits on here, then this guy would then back that up and be available so that I don't lose my capability. Because it's possible I lose Active Directory, but the file server part of this is still working. So that's what's going to happen in a relatively short period of time. So now let me go back and show you on the computer a very, very useful function to close out this video. And that's how to map through the Sigma NAS Active Directory. Okay, I'm back in the Windows login that I had before. And I wanted to show these 3 test accounts that I created. Let me show you what I did in this organizational unit in terms of causing certain drive mappings to automatically occur. So if you look at the organizational unit in the group policy manual, I have one policy set up. If I right-click on this one policy, and then I look at user configuration preferences, the only thing I added as a policy was under Windows setting, drive maps. And I have a drive map, drive S. So if I log on to that right now, so I have to specify the full domain. Test again, I believe, is the one I want to do. Give it the password. I have a disk PC icon here. Let me see what mappings I have. Well, I have this drive S map. It was done automatically. It's hard for me to prove that here unless I create another account, which I may do. A mapping to one of my NAS devices did not take, because this user does not have permission account on that NAS server, so it couldn't map it. Let me log out of this and show you. I'm going to make a change so another one automatically maps to RD server. Let me close this for now. I could just right-click in this field here and say new user if I wanted to do that and just add another user to here. If I'm going to add a new share, the first thing I have to make sure is that that share is something that the user I want to log into has permission to do. Test again, I'm not sure if I do. So what I have to do is go into computers. Well, actually I have to go into domain controllers because that's my file server as well. And this RD server, I have to right-click on it and say manage. Always get that error. Doesn't hurt anything. And if I come under here under shared folders and then shares, let me pick one from the top here. Let's pick applications. That's share. Does the user have authority to go there? Let me see if that's the case. So if I open that up and then click share permissions, I can see who has authorization to go there. And that user is not one of them. So I have to add a new user to it. So I'm going to add in test. Again, I'm going to check it. Is that a valid user? Yes, it is. That's a valid user on this domain. Right now, test again has only read permission, which is fine. Let's just let it so it can only read that share. I don't want it to modify that share. So I'll say apply. I'll say OK. That's the first step you have to do before you can go in and make the share mapped for that user. If that user just tried to map it themselves, they would not be able to because they didn't have permission until I just gave it to them. But now I want the Active Directory to automatically add that share to this user. So now let me go into the organizational unit RD users. There's one default policy there. That's def drives means default drives. It's actually from here, but it's been put into that organizational unit. It hasn't been put into this organizational unit. So I can edit it in either place because that's what's called a link. It points to the same file, but I'll just edit it here. It doesn't really matter. Right click on it, I'll edit it. And the actual parameter you change is under user configuration preferences, Windows settings, and drive maps. So currently I have just S drive mapped. So let me go ahead and add another one to that. Right click, new, map drive. It now opens up a dialog that allows me to map a new drive or edit an existing one. It defaulted to update. I do not want that. I want create. The location I want to create, give it the full path, RD server, / the share name. It's the way it was created in Sigma NAS, that particular share. I want it to reconnect upon login, so I'm going to check that box and I'm going to pick the letter that I want. I could let it pick by itself, but I want to give it a letter. So I'm going to go ahead and give it drive T. I've also got to set these hide options to show all, both of them. Otherwise, only administrators might see it, or only applications running on there might see it. So both of those have to be show all. Then I have to apply, and that should be it. So let me now go over here and log in to test again. It'll remember PE from doers last time because it shows it. So all I have to do is give it the password. And now when I click on it, I now have system and applications. I still can't get to the NAS drive. And if I open that up, there's nothing there. But let me try to create something. It only has read permission. Let me try to create something and see what I get. Nope, I got a permission denied. Now, if there were files there, I'd be able to see them because I do have read permission. If I didn't have read permission, I wouldn't even be able to map it. Anyway, that shows how we can set up a policy to automatically map a drive. Well, that completes this video that I wanted to do on Active Directory servers and whether or not they're useful or not. I find it very useful, and I don't think it's that hard to set one up. If you're going to set up a server anyway, Sigma NAS is a good server, and it has the capability of becoming an Active Directory server as well. and there's benefits to it. So hopefully you enjoyed this video or got something out of it that you found useful, and if you did, do me a favor and at least consider subscribing to my channel. When the little head pops up here, click on it, follow along, and subscribe. Well, until the next time, take care, and I hope everybody is doing well.